Happy June. Welcome to Agree or Disagree, the podcast hockey edition, June 1st. My name is Kevin Olenek. You can follow me on Twitter at KEVOLE. You subscribe to all the podcasts on Spotify. Apple, I guess, is that the new name? Did they change it? iTunes is no more, apparently. Tyler, Sean, do you know what they are naming this?
I don't.
I do not know that yet.
I feel very old admitting that I'm not keeping up anymore with that.
Yeah, I don't know, but you can subscribe on whatever that is. You can follow on Facebook as well, and we will have some other places you can find us and some announcements very, very soon, actually. Probably maybe next week. Who knows? That's a bit of a teaser. But I am, of course, joined by Tyler, as always. How are you?
Not too bad, Kevin. It's been an interesting last week here up in northern BC with some smoke haze, and now it's cooled off a bit. Looks like we got some rain coming in.
Good. It is quite smoky in Calgary, Sean.
Yeah, it is. That's all that smoke that was up by Tyler has moved down here to Calgary,
and amplified quite a bit too. Apparently,
yeah. I live pretty close to downtown Calgary, and I can barely see all the office towers. So it's not fun when you go outside.
Yeah, and apparently so thick it put the Stamps. Riders CFL preseason game in doubt, but apparently that's apparently the smoke has cooled off just enough to allow that to happen.
Yes, yeah, but like in all seriousness, and I remember living in Kamloops last summer with that smoke. Be safe out there. Look after the things that you do need to look after out there, and look after each other, because it is. You know, we make jokes, but it actually can harm people pretty much too. But a little later on, we've got a couple of guests this week. We will be talking to Jack from the Oilers YYC Podcast in a little bit about the new hires in Edmonton. And we will also be talking to Cam Robinson about the NHL draft. He has some very interesting things to say about Capo Caco and Philip Grobauer, which I think will be interesting as well. But just to start off here, we'll get into some quick Canuck news. Brock Besser, contract talks, according to Twitter, are far apart. Should we, as the Canuck fan base, be in complete panic, or can we just calm everyone down?
I think everyone needs to calm down. It's only the end of May, beginning of June. No other RFAs have been signed yet of note, and they've only met once. So the Besser's camp knows that they don't have any contractual leverage for this time around because of the limited amount of games he played in his first season in his entry-level contract, which was the 9 games when he came out of North Dakota. He is not eligible for arbitration rights and not eligible to be offer sheeted on by another team. So just we need to sit back, relax, and this will get done. And it'll still be a decent contract. He'll still get a lot of money, but it won't be horrible compared to other contracts in the NHL.
Yeah, very early in the process. We also saw with Bo Horvat when his last contract negotiation happened that it took a while before a deal was reached. So no need to panic at this point. I mean, they haven't, July 1st is still a long way away. Once they start dealing with unrestricted free agents, if Besser hasn't been figured out by that point, at least I'll have a clearer picture on what the salary structure is going to look like.
Yeah. Oh,
like I said, no other RFAs have been signed yet, so this summer's RFA market hasn't really been set, at least forwards-wise. So it's going to be tough for them to really know exactly. Once one of those top guys goes, I think it's going to be in quick succession for the rest of them, unless unless like a Marner or a Point go for big money. But it's nothing to worry about.
Yeah, it's early. I don't suspect this could take a while to. This is just part of the negotiation process. I don't suspect anything worrisome there. From what I understand, there's no news on Edler. I don't know what's going on there. But really right now it's been kind of quiet, mostly in Canuck land, which is probably not too surprising overall. They're getting ready for the draft, so I would think nothing to worry about, I don't think, on the Canuck end. I don't think.
No, not even. No, like I said, there's nothing to worry about. This week is the draft combine, so I wouldn't be surprised if Benning, Wise, Broad, Brackett, and all those guys are out in Buffalo for that, and they'll probably reconvene with the agents of Besser and Edler next week.
Yeah. There's nothing to worry about there. The other thing I did want to get to, and I don't, it's not really specifically Vancouver Canucks news, but it's Jason Botchford news. Wyatt, did I get his name mispronounced? Wyatt.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, he has set up a GoFundMe for what has been called the Botchford's Bench. And they have raised enough funds for that, which is great to hear. And that bench is going to be somewhere near Rogers Arena. And I think some huge kudos to Wyatt for what they have done there, and for the Canucks community fan base to recognize what Botch has meant to the fan base. I think that. So I just thought I think that's really great, and it's very unusual. It feels unusual to me that there's, with a fan base that has such a deep relationship with a media member, and I think that's quite fascinating, quite touching, and I'm really glad that this bench is going to be something that you'll be able to see at Rogers Arena.
Yeah, definitely a fantastic move there.
Yeah,
and Botchford was a big help and mentor for Wyatt, so it's something I'm not surprised that he did, and it's fantastic that the funds are raised really, really quickly for that as well.
Yeah, so kudos for that. Looking forward to see that. I am curious, and maybe we'll talk about this when we speak to. We will be having the C4 podcast come on, but I really wonder how the Vancouver Canuck team will honor Botchford going forward. I'm sure that they will, but I wonder what. I hope something is in store for that as well.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to get Jack from the Oilers YYC podcast on the line here in a quick moment. So just stay tuned. We'll be back for that. So hang tight. All right. Well, joining us from also smoky Calgary, not as smoky now, is one of the hosts of the Oilers YYC podcast. It's Jack at Big Man Tree on Twitter, former Yeg living in YYC, Oilers hockey. MTB skiing, beer travels, always up for some mischief and fun. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How about you guys?
I'm great.
Yeah, we're doing all right.
Yeah, hanging in there through the long, drawn-out Stanley Cup final, it seems like.
Yes.
Well, yeah. At least it's not as bad as the NBA final, where we're getting 2 games a week. So I guess there's a bit of pro to that one.
Yes.
Yeah, 2 days between games there, and no travel involved.
No, and at least we get a reprieve, not like 24/7 Raptors. Anyway, sort of a different topic. I wanted to start with I wanted to play a little bit of the beginning of the Ken Holland podcast, because I felt like this was the epitome of where Oiler fans are at. So let's play this a little bit.
Am I dead inside? Okay, that feels like an unnecessarily dramatic reaction to the news that the to him in a moment, but this moment feels so familiar. After all, we've been through New GM Day on multiple occasions during this decade-plus of darkness. Think back to the fall of 2009. Steve Tambolini getting his shot as general manager. Here's Steve Tambolini, a guy who was just waiting for the opportunity, a highly respected assistant GM who was poised to be the next great NHL executive if someone would just give him a chance and a team. And if you think I'm joking, I'm not. That was actually the narrative around this guy. How'd that go? Let's move ahead to April 2013. Tambolini gets fired, and his former coach, former captain, Craig McTavish, riding to the rescue. Craig left. He went to Queens. He got an executive MBA. He's got bona fide management chops. How'd that go? April 2015, 2 short years later, here comes Peter Chiarelli. He's got that shiny Stanley Cup ring. He knows how to build those big, heavy, winning hockey teams. The Oilers won't get pushed around anymore. And best of all, he's an outsider, not part of that old boys club. How'd that go? There's a voice in the back of my head that tells me that Ken Holland is a smart option. He's one of the few people who can credibly walk into this organization and call the shots. Who's going to tell this guy that he doesn't know what he's doing? Maybe he can decide how he wants to build the Oilers without interference from red wine drinking old-timers. I don't think that any of the first-time GMs that were floated for this position, like Bill Zito, Mike Fuda, any of the other quote-unquote sexy picks, would have been able to operate with that kind of independence. And when it comes to Detroit's rebuild, I don't think Holland gets enough credit. He's stocked the cupboard with picks, prospects, young players. It'll be a huge help to Steve Yzerman. That voice in my head tells me that this should work. I should probably be pretty pleased with this outcome. But I ignore that voice, and judging by the reaction on social media, a whole lot of other people feel the same way. Because fans have been burned over and over and over by these hires. New GM Day has always ended in disappointment. Coming in, promising a new era, a new way of doing things. We buy in because we want this to work. We buy in because we want the Oilers to win, and we are always disappointed.
Yeah, I thought that was such a fantastic piece of where I'm kind of feeling the Oiler fan base is. This has been a sales pitch after sales pitch after sales pitch of the same thing over and over and over again. So looking back from this process of Ken Holland to Dave Tippett, has that changed? Where are you at? What are you feeling right now?
Honestly, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Again, you said it perfectly. We've gone through this over and over, from the bold moves of the McTavish to the I have a plan from Chiarelli, and now it's the buzzword is stability. So I guess after the dust is settled and we've got Holland in there, what we are starting to see as Oilers fans, which is a little exciting, and exciting might be a little strong of a word. It's more of a little bit more of a relief, is he started to make some changes, and he's making changes at the top with some people that have been there through the entire decade of darkness, whatever we want to call it. They've been there for a long time, and they're people that have not been touched. So obviously Holland has come in and has been given the autonomy, the authority to make the changes he believes that need to happen in the hockey organization to help this team develop. We're talking about a guy that was a part of an organization for 32 or 36 years, was quite successful at every position he held, right up to GM, where he helped orchestrate teams that won Stanley Cups, made playoffs years after years, and were always a threat when the playoffs came. To hear him talk, even from the press conference on, there was a bit of a calming factor. I know a lot of people in Edmonton were all wound up that it was Holland, and it's, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who they put in there. It's the same story repeated. But at least with Holland, you've got somebody who's been around, who has that stature within the game, that he's going to come in, and the only way he would have ever come in is if he got to call the shots. And I don't think we've seen that probably since the Seda days, to be honest. We had Lowe in there, we had Tambolini in there, we had McTavish, but the core of what was around them never changed. And now that we're seeing Sutter's gone, McTavish is gone, J.J. Hunter, the media guy, the communications director, he's gone. Like, there's changes afoot. And I guess as a lifelong Oilers fan who's suffered through this, that's good news. So is it exciting? No, not really. But there's changes. And this is something we're kind of not used to.
So, Jack, on your podcast, I've heard you guys talk about trying to break the cycle that seems to exist with the Oilers. Am I hearing correctly from you that you're not sold that the cycle is broken quite yet, or do you think this is substantially different than some of those other hires?
Oh, it is substantially different, especially from the last two, because we're seeing people that have been in a position for many years with the Oilers that were never touched. So, people like to go back and talk about the Oilers with their problems with evaluating talent, with their drafting, evaluating the pro scouting side, like the players, the trades that have been made. The people that would be in that room, whether it's Sutter, who was the vice president of pro scouting, or McTavish, who's been there as a consultant since he was let go as the GM or replaced as the GM. These guys, Scott Housen, these guys have been there and have been untouchable. So it didn't matter who got brought in as a GM. The core of if you think of it as kind of like a government, like the government may have changed, but the bureaucracy was always still the same. Now that Holland's there, we've seen, two fairly significant names that have been here for a long time. They're gone. And so I think we're starting to see the change. And I'm assuming what Holland did is he went in and he talked to every person that was there to try to figure out who's doing what, like you would do if you were taking over an organization. And the fact that we've seen changes like this, because we did not see changes like this with Chiarelli. We did not see changes like this with McTavish. We did not see changes like this with Tambellini. That core always kind of stayed. You get little minor changes, little tweaks here and there, like Chiarelli brought in Keith Gretzky, but that core, those guys that have been involved with pro scouting, minor scouting, operations, they always kind of stayed the same. And I think that's where we were starting to see a lot of issues. I don't know that the last couple GMs actually had the keys to the house, so to speak. I think they were just allowed to live there, but still had, all these roommates that they couldn't get rid of.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and with all these behind the scenes managerial changes coming, are you expecting some big player movement to come this summer?
I don't know. I think the problem we come down to with player movement, it's the same thing most teams have a problem with. We still all play within a cap. The unfortunate part is Chiarelli put us in some really bad contract situations, even like right up to the bitter end, like within days of him being fired. We're still sitting on the Lucic contract for $6 million. If Lucic can be moved, I'm still not completely sold that it's the best idea, because unless we're getting something that can replace him, and I mean replace him at a value of what he is now, which is a good third line winger that can shuffle up and down the lineup as needed. He's not a first line winger anymore. He's just not. He doesn't have the foot speed. You look at the other players that we're kind of straddled with. I mean, there was the horrible trade for Manning, who we've got on the books for $2.5 million, who couldn't even crack the AHL team towards the end of the season. So there's some money there that I don't know how he can move. So on the player side, I suspect there'll be some tweaks. I mean, they're going to have to do something and try to bring in a couple pieces in free agency just to fill some holes. We've got some young players that I know a lot of people are running around thinking that the Evan Bouchards of the world are going to make the team and everything's going to be great, but I don't foresee them playing in the NHL permanently next year. Maybe not. If they do, it won't be till later in the season. So I don't foresee like any massive changes in the player personnel. I think there'll be some minor tweaks. I think there'll be some additions. We might get a couple deletions if there's some contract movements that can come around. Other than that, I think this is the team very close to the team that Tippett's going to hit the ice with come training camp.
So What do you think of the Tippett hire? Because at first glance, my first thought was this seemed a little odd. I'm trying to match what we've known Dave Tippett to be in Arizona to Connor McDavid, and I'm not seeing how that works. But I read a little bit into what Tippett's history, and I read into a lot of Oiler experts and Oilers insiders are thinking, and there seemed to be a bit more of a different thought process that maybe this actually is not a terrible idea. Where are you on that?
I'm actually okay with the Tippett hire. I know when they were originally talking about coaches, that was a name that was like, oh, and there's Tippetts out there. Well, when it became obvious, I don't know, like a week ago that Tippett was going to get hired, and it was the worst kept secret in history, I think. You sat down. I think we all had that first, thought in our head. It's like, oh, but this is like a total defensive coach, like, old school, like back in the Jacques Lemaire's days and all that kind of stuff. But when you go back and you look at his coaching history, he really wasn't a defensive coach. He believes in a structure approach to coaching. But you go back and you look at the players when he's had good players, he never stifled their offensive ability. He just expects the accountability of the players within their zone. And then we started hearing interviews with, people like Ray Ferraro, who played with him, as well as, has watched his coaching career, the Shane Doans of the world, the back in the day when he still had players like Zuboff and Modano in Dallas. You start to look at, he's not a defensive coach where he's going to make your entire team play the trap so they don't make mistakes and then hopefully win 1-0. He wants your team to play together in a supported role so that you're not getting scored on, but you're still going out to get points. And I think that when we look at the bad times, the bad teams, quote unquote bad teams he had in Phoenix or in Arizona, those were not good teams. So he was coaching to make sure that they didn't get scored on 6 times every night. So you've got to look at the teams he had to see what kind of coach he was doing. So is he a defensive coach, or was he coaching defensively because of the team he had? And honestly, the last 3 or 4 years that he was in Phoenix, they were horrible teams. He was coaching to play defense so they didn't get lit up every night. So this comes back to even our little bit from Dave from our previous podcast. It's a wait and see. Am I excited about Tippett? No. Would I have been excited about anybody? Probably not. Very much in a wait and see pattern. But I don't think Tippett's a bad hire. If he can put a structure into our bottom 6 is effective and not getting scored on and allows our top 2 lines to still score, that difference alone, the 11 points that we missed the playoffs by, maybe that's the 11 points we're missing. I don't think he's a defensive coach. I just think he believes in a structured manner that the game is played. And from everything that we've heard from listening to radio, like I listen to a lot of the Edmonton radio still, so they've had a lot of interviews with former players and assistant coaches he's been with and stuff, he's a great communicator and he works well with the players, and the players tend to play for him. And if that's the case, maybe this will work out.
Yeah, Jack, I think you really hit it on the head there. Structure is the key word. Like the Oilers were just tighten it up and play with even a little bit more structure. I think you could certainly expect better results. So I agree with you there. A question, though, for you in regards to going with a namer veteran coach, a guy like Tippett versus some name off the board, like doing what Ottawa did, for example, by hiring DJ Smith. Where are you at on that? Do you feel like the Oilers needed to have a guy with the NHL head coaching credibility in this case?
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit the other day, and oddly enough, I was talking about my dad the other day about this. I think the advantage of having someone like Tippett come in is over, say, a DJ Smith, even a Todd Nelson, whose name got batted around here a bit, we thought would get a little bit more look only because his connection to the Holland and the Red Wings winning the Calder Cup with Detroit's AHL team, is Tippett's going to come in with the experience of how to start fresh with a new team. he has all of that experience. I mean, he's coached, Dallas and Arizona. He was an assistant in LA. He knows how to come into a new team and what to do to get started right off the bat. He has his little playbook, his little structure. He knows what he's doing. I think in this particular case, that was something that they really kind of had to do, because if you get to go after a younger coach, which I'm not saying isn't a bad idea necessarily at all. It's just a younger coach isn't going to have that same experience to come into an organization and be like, okay, guys, this is where we need to start together, and this is where we're going to build to. Whereas someone like Tippett, he has that experience. He's done it before. He knows a starting point, and he knows what to do to start the process. He's not figuring it out as he goes. Some cases that might work out fine. This case, it might be better to have that stability of a coach that knows where to start and what direction to go in, if that makes any kind of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly does.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was an interesting dilemma that you're in, because I don't think you're in the Ottawa situation where you're in development. I'm not saying you're in Stanley Cup win mode, but I think that there's an expectation to go at least playoff mode. So I think I understand the veteran approach there.
Well, the thing with Tippett and the Oilers situation is that Tippett's made a career out of getting the most out of the team, and I think that's what they're looking at now. Is like, because, like you said, Jack, they don't really have much room in terms of working cap, and they just need to find a way to get the best out of this roster as they have it right now.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's, if Holland plays his cards right for the next couple of years, he can retool this team. He can reload this team. Again, we do have some good, 2 or 3 very good potential prospects that could come in to help. We get some cap space cleared up. We can make some moves. We can restock the cupboard, so to speak. But I don't think we have the ability to do that for the first couple of years that he's here. So if you've got a coach that can elevate the play, we're only a couple of years removed from the Oilers doing a pretty good run in the playoffs, and we still have that core is still there. So obviously the year we made the playoffs, we had some players that played, very close to their career highs or created their career highs. There's no saying that you can't do that again with the same core. And again, I agree. We're not Stanley Cup mode, but it would be sure nice just to get in. I think most teams, even the Canucks, let's just get in. Who cares after that, right? And that's usually the feeling with the playoffs. So if Tippett can come in and provide that guidance with the team and get them to that point to at least make the playoffs for a year, maybe make a playoffs for 2 years, while Holland will have the ability to start moving some stuff around to bring those support players in and make a stronger team, then that's the stability and the base that you need for a team to move forward.
Want to raise a couple of names here, a couple of forwards that are heading into their final year before free agency. Sam Gagner and Zach Kassian. Do you see either of those remaining with the Oilers prior to the start of the season, or do you see maybe one of those two getting moved out? I honestly think they'll both still be here at the beginning of the season. And the only reason I say that is because we don't have much to replace them with right now. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest mistakes Chiarelli made last year was assuming that we had 2 young wingers in Puljujarvi and Yamamoto were going to make this big step, play full-time in the NHL, and we were good to go. When that didn't happen, we had nothing to replace them with. So I'm hoping, from what I've seen in Holland's approach and done some reading on what he did with Detroit, he doesn't make that change until he knows damn well there's someone there to replace it. So if we don't have a player to replace Gagner and we don't have a player to replace Kassian, I don't see them going anywhere. Gagner is a bit of an enigma. You guys have seen him out for Vancouver, and he's
he's a player that should be better than he is, and he always was. And when he came to the Oilers last year, he actually did quite well. So do we keep him around? Well, again, we're kind of stuck. We don't really have much to replace him with. Kassian, on the other hand, the problem with Kassian is when he's going well, he's a very effective NHL player. He's a great third-line winger who can, again, move up and down the lineup a bit. He had some really crazy good success playing on McDavid's line towards the end of the season, which was actually kind of really cool to see because we'd all kind of talked about it. The problem with a player like Kassian is he's the type of player you need if you do make the playoffs. Mm-hmm. He's one of those guys that you kind of need to, just do your job in the regular season so that when we get to playoffs, we can unleash you. Because we saw that in Edmonton when we made the playoffs. He turned into an absolute beast, got some goals, took care of some players, laid the hits out. You could see other teams like taking a step back when he was on the ice during the playoffs. Like he ran Ruckshaw over San Jose. Like anyone touched the puck, he hit them. Like he's crazy, and he is crazy. Kassian's awesome, but when he's amped and he's wound, which you need in the playoffs, he's a different cat. Like he's out. He smells blood all the time. So if you're gonna give up a player like Kassian, again, you got to replace that intensity that he can bring. And if you can't, then you got to keep him. And if you re-sign him the next year, he's going to have to take the same contract or less money because I don't think he's done anything to earn anything more than what he's getting. And that's the same that goes with Gagne.
Yeah, Gagne, just to finish up on the point of Gagne, I mean, when he got the one call-up with the Canucks when they were injury ravaged, I thought he performed quite well. I was glad to see that he was getting another shot with the Oilers because I kind of felt like he was getting the shaft with the Canucks. I mean, they obviously want to give some younger guys some playing time, but he signed the contract, got demoted, was very professional about it, helped when required. It was really nice to have a veteran presence to pluck out of the minors when injuries started adding up, and did quite well. So, if you're an Oilers fan, you hope to see him continue to be helpful and not be in decline here come next season.
And part of it with Gagne here too, I think, had a lot to do with the contract that he signed. It was almost like he was a victim of almost circumstance of unfortunate expectation, maybe that wasn't necessarily fair to him. I mean, if I had that contract offered to me, I would take that for sure. So but I think he's probably in a better place at Edmonton. I think. We've talked. We have an interview with Cam Robinson coming up here, and so I haven't heard much of where the Oilers are at in terms of draft. So I guess a couple of questions in mind. Is the first round pick in play, as in tradable in your mind? You kind of mentioned that you're up against the cap, and ideally, if you're the Oilers, or what is the philosophy you're hoping that the Oilers are taking into this draft?
As for the number one pick, if it's up for, if it's available, I don't think so. And the only reason I don't think so is, again, it's the cap situation. We don't, if you're going to give up a number one to bring in a scoring winger, for example, to potentially play with McDavid or Draisaitl, or to bring in a top four defenseman, I don't know if we'd have the salary to make up for that, like to get someone worthwhile. Like if you had to, package the number one with a Puljujärvi or an Ethan Bear or something like that to pull that marquee or, second line marquee player in. I don't know if we'd have the cap room to make up for it. So it might be just as well to hang on to it and see what we can get to continue to hopefully the trend of actually some very good drafting the last 3 or 4 years have actually brought for Edmonton. And if you're not an Oilers fan, the drafting that the Oilers have done in, say, the last 3 to 4 years beats every other period in Oilers history. And I mean, there's not another time in Oilers history that could even be put in the same room with the drafting in the last 3 to 4 years. That's how atrocious it's been for so long. So to have players that are coming in that weren't just first round draft or number one draft picks and actually being successful is nice to see. So talking about the draft that's coming up, we're picking number 8. So it's I always find it kind of difficult to mock draft, in my personal opinion, to mock draft too much when you're past the top 5, because it's really hard to say what the teams ahead of you are going to do. As for what I think we should be looking for a draft pick, it's wingers. It's forwards that have speed, skill, and size. Just the same thing every other team's really looking for: speed, skill, and size. There are some players that are intriguing that are going to be probably hanging around in the 8th place, because let's face it, somebody ahead is always going to go off the board a little bit. They're going to have their scouting staff is going to say, no, this guy that's considered 11th in 11th position, we're going to take them at 7th. We see that all the time. So, I'm thinking like a player like a Kirby Dash from Saskatoon Blades. There's the American Boldy. Yeah. There's another one. I mean, these are big, strong, fast wingers that would have some pretty good upside to them. Even like somewhere in those kind of places. I think you look at some of the ones that are out there, like the Cole Caulfields of the world, another good American player. That's back into the Yamamoto size. Like, that's a 5'7", 5'8" winger. And I honestly think that the size of the NHL player we're gonna have a little bit of a shift here over the next few years, where they're not going to be 6'4", 220 pounds, because they're not fast enough to keep up to the 6'1", 190, 200 pound player. But that 5'7", 160, 170 pound player, they just get worn down over a season. So I don't know if that's necessarily the way to go. But in my mind, I think it's going after that skilled winger. Someone that can develop over the next couple of years, come in and be an economical player for the Oilers on their entry level in 2 years, when we need to start restocking some of the wingers that we're losing, instead of trying to save the day in free agency like we always seem to try to do, and we're never successful at it.
For me, there's three players that if I was the Oilers, I'd be looking like really, really into, and one is Cole Caulfield, but like you said, he's got the size issue. One is Arthur Kaliev. He's got probably the best shot in the draft, and he's got some holes in his game, but if you put him on a wing with Draisaitl or McDavid and just let him find the soft spots and let them feed the puck and him rifle it, I think that's a recipe for success. And then the Russian Vasily Podkolzin, I think, is someone that would be right up Holland's alley in terms of someone who I think is going to drop from the 3rd, 4th spot that he has been sitting in a lot of the public rankings throughout the year. But because he's Russian and all that, there's a good chance he falls. So, yeah, I agree with you. Going for the skilled winger is huge, but it's also finding the ones that are likely 1 or 2 years away from moving up into the NHL as opposed to 3 to 5.
Yeah, and that's where I think finding that larger, speedier, skilled forward is important, because if you're 190 pounds, 5'11", 5'10", you still got to turn into a man before you're going to play. So that's one of those guys that's, like you said, that's like a 3 to 5 year out guy. You find a guy that's 6'2" and he's already 190 or 200 pounds. That's somebody you can mold a bit and bring in a couple of years. That 2 to 3 year window instead of the 3 to 5 year window. And I think that's, if you're drafting first round, that should be the type of player you're looking for. You don't want the long play on this. You want the medium play on this, because the short play doesn't work. The short play works on very few players. That's why we only usually see the top 1 or 2 that really make the league and are contributing factors, even on off years for drafts. So it's finding that right fit for the team that you want to build, not the team that we have. And we've been burned many years in the past drafting a player for the team that we have, And then when he can't play yet or doesn't have the development yet to play, he becomes a bust right away. The fans get on him, and suddenly we need to trade Puljujarvi, for example. It's like, well, no, we just need to let him develop and see what happens. Stop rushing those draft picks.
I think the Oilers are going to have to play a really fine line on going forwards, because they can't waste too much more of the McDavid-Draisaitl era and window. But you can't, as you said, you've seen too many rushed prospects come up and bust out and not reach their ceiling because they were rushed. These top end players are coming in younger and younger these days. But I think the second round and third round picks are the ones that you're going to need to see major changes and major development from for the Oilers to be successful going forwards.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I was just thinking, and Holland did very well, is he drafted a couple of guys in late rounds named Datsuk and Zetterberg. Have you heard of them? They turned out okay with the Red Wings. So I think that's something, I think that's another strength with Holland has. What are you expecting this year? Like we've talked a little bit about Puljujarvi. What are you expecting coming into this year? Is this a guy that we're expecting big things? Are you concerned? Where are you at with Jesse Puljujarvi right now?
I think the biggest thing with Puljujarvi is it's going to be interesting to see what he does when he comes into training camp without two hips that are bothering the crap out of him. That was something I from what we've gathered or been told, that's been a nagging injury for a couple of years. That maybe wasn't, I don't know if it wasn't diagnosed properly or he didn't let on that it was as big of an issue as it is, but I mean, the operation, like the surgeries he had to fix that, the hips, that's stuff that usually only happens to 50-year-olds, but it's something that can very easily develop in young people. That could completely change his skating ability. I mean, that could change his mobility. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes in a new atmosphere with, hopefully healthy, to see if that can help him build his confidence early in training camp to see where he can end up. I mean, I think he's still a very skilled player. He does make some really interesting decisions, I'll put it that way, with the puck. But, I mean, he's 21 years old. That's going to happen. I think this comes back to that case where he was rushed into a position that he should not have been rushed into. He should have spent more time in the AHL. I still have just a weird gut feeling that somewhere along the line, Chiarelli may have promised or guaranteed the player and agent something that he shouldn't have. And when Puljujarvi kind of hit a slide there and, should have been sent down, he wasn't. And I don't know why he wasn't. It just seemed very odd to me personally that they didn't ever send him down. They send him for a 10-game stint in the A, see if he can get his mojo back, but that never happened. It just seemed really weird. So I'm hoping and this goes for a lot of players that are on the team. I mean, this comes back to even the Lucic, the Gagne, the Jujhar Khaira, the Puljujarvi it's a fresh start, and it's a pure fresh start. Here's a new GM, here's a new coach. I know we've heard the story before, but come in open-minded and see where this can go. I mean, there's a very good chance you're going to end up with two veteran coaches as assistant coaches. They let Trent Yanni go today and Vizero go today, but that means Gullickson's still kicking around, and there's still lots of talk that Playfair might be the other assistant coach. So you could have a very progressive, experienced coaching staff to work with this team next year, and that could change the dynamics of a lot of players that are kind of bubble players or maybe underperformed last year or even the year before that they may have, this might be the bounce back year. But at the same time, tempered expectations are, let's wait and see. Me personally, I think Jesse Puljujarvi is a hell of a hockey player and there's some great potential there, and I'd love to see him break out. If he could turn into a 15 to 20 goal scorer with, 40, 45 points, success. Happy.
You guys
I will say one thing is that if Playfair is the other assistant coach, then I think you're going to have to up the coach's stick allowance, because you never know when they're going to get chucked into the crowd or broken over the boards.
That's true.
You could have like a stick throw-a-thon between Gullickson and Playfair. That would be amazing. It's intermission entertainment. My last question I have, there's been a lot, we've talked a little bit about the offer sheet game here, and it's been a lot of talk around the NHL if it's something that is going to happen. It sounds to me what you're saying is the Oilers' cap situation isn't going to necessarily get them involved. But where are you on that? What are your thoughts? I'm not saying a Mitch Marner is a guy that they should go after, because that would seem pretty expensive and maybe not necessarily in the plan. But if there was kind of an under radar RFA, would you think that the Oilers would consider it, or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. The offer sheet thing in the NHL is so underused. Just in general. When was the last time we had a substantial offer sheet? Was it when Philly went after Shea Weber?
Yeah.
However many years ago that was the last time. I mean, it screwed Nashville over pretty hard. That's Montreal's issue, but that's the last time we saw any major offer sheet come out. I think the main reason you just don't see the offer sheets is the compensation that's required now is nuts. For example, if you're over $10,000 or $10,500 when you do your offer sheet, so that's like the Mitch Marner type money, that team has to give up 4 first-round draft picks. So what are you doing to your team if you, for the next 4 years, you don't get a first-round draft pick? And even if you get down into the $4 million range, you're still giving up a first-round draft pick and a third round. So the offer sheet thing, while sometimes it's like, oh yeah, throw a bunch of money at, get this great player, it's one player at the sacrifice of potentially maybe 2 or 3 players. I haven't taken a really hard look at the RFA class that's out there right now. I know there's a few interesting looking ones that are coming through. Obviously Mitch Marner would be the top of that list in my mind. And I would sure love to see someone offer sheet him. Just to watch Toronto absolutely lose their minds. I don't know if you guys are the same as us, but anytime something screws over the Maple Leafs,
I feel terrible when that happens.
Go about our day.
Yeah. I just feel so terrible when that stuff happens to Toronto. Oh,
yeah, it's horrible, right?
Horrible.
So, you got players like Mikko Rantanen out of Colorado coming up, Braden Point coming up out of Tampa Bay, Sebastian Aho out of Carolina. Now, Aho, yeah, there's a name. That's kind of that middle ground kind of player that, in the right situation, could very much be helpful to a team. Whether that's worth offer sheeting for, I don't know. And it becomes a game of what are you getting out of this? Like Aho's salary last year, his cap hit was $925,000. So yeah, if you're gonna go after that, you're not going to be giving up much to offer sheet him. But is it worth offer sheeting someone like that? Patrick Laine's an RFA next year. Do you go after a Laine?
Yeah, well, the thing with those big ones, as you said, is that they're just the amount of draft picks you're going to have to give up to get them is quite substantial and sets you back a lot in terms of keeping your prospect pool and cupboard full. The ones that I keep looking at are the secondary ones on teams that already have a big name RFA that they have to sign as well. So the Sam Bennett out of Calgary, Kasperi Kapanen and Andreas Janssen out of Toronto. I'll even throw Kyle Connor out of Winnipeg when they've got Patrick Laine and Jacob Trouba to sign.
Kyle Connor was the one I was going to bring up next. He would be in that line of someone I would say, yeah, let's go for it. It just depends on what Winnipeg qualifies in that, which will obviously be probably close to the league minimum, or it'll be whatever the minimum is over the last year's salary, because that's what they always do with an RFA. So.
I said the Aho is going to get paid. Laine is going to get paid. Connor is going to get paid. It's the three that stand out to me in terms of if you want to go after someone who can slide into your top six and you can get for relative, like you're not going to pay 4 first-round picks for. Like I said, it's the Kapanen, it's Janssen and Bennett. I think are the three that you could offer for $4 million a season. Give up a second-round pick for them, and potentially put Toronto or Calgary in a major around a hurt cap-wise.
No, and again, yeah, that level of player to go after them, I think it's a possibility. But I still also think that there's very much this unwritten rule in the NHL that you just don't do this, or else we would see it more with that level of player. I mean, you don't even see players really get traded in their RFA year anymore. They seem to kind of be almost protected just because it's the way the NHL's always worked. But yeah, there's definitely a few players there. And to slide someone if you could land a Kyle Connor for $4.5 million, like as an Oilers situation, you could make that work. But you just want to make sure that you're not hindering yourself. There's other teams out there, like even like a Vancouver, like they're dancing with a bit more cap space. You add a Kyle Connor level player to your team. That's a big win, especially just to give up maybe a second round draft pick. That's probably worth it for a team like that. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. I just don't think it's the way the Oilers would go right now.
No, I think, like you were saying, I think they're going to dabble around the edges and hope that Tippett can get the most out of what they currently have.
The one I'm intrigued by, and the name that's sticking to me, the other one that I'm intrigued by, and I'm not saying they should or they should not, but Jordan Binnington is a name that it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Because that's such a big question, right? Especially if he wins the cup. I don't know.
That's a hard one because, I mean, Binnington, you look at his career, there's not much of a career. Not in the NHL anyways. He's got, in 2015, 16, I think it was, he played a game. And then this year he got called up due to injuries, and yeah, he's lit it up. But we all know that the career trajectory of a goaltender in the NHL, it's like shoot a shotgun at something 100 feet away. One of those points you'll eventually get to. It's such a weird one, and he's only 25 years old. But we've also seen goalies catch lightning in a bottle like this. So I don't know. I have a hard time believing someone would go after him with big money. I mean, someone would go after him like $3 million. St. Louis would match it. If they wanted $4 million, they'd probably match it. So that it's an interesting one, like you said. I mean, especially if he wins the cup. This is like watching Cam Ward beat Edmonton in 2006 all over again. Like it's that young goalie that kind of comes out of nowhere, catches fire, and rips through and gets a cup. Which I personally hope St. Louis does win the cup. So it's a great story. Be interesting to see what happens, but I think based on how he's played the half of the season he's played this year, I think the Blues will do whatever they can to keep him.
And Jake Gallen's only got 1 year left on his contract at 4.35, so I think there'd be a way out of it even if they get cap strapped.
Tyler, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the topic of goaltending, there's been some scuttlebutt about maybe Mike Smith wanting to hook up with Dave Tippett in Edmonton now, and obviously the Oilers would have some interest in making that kind of a move. Do you think it's realistic, though?
Yes and no. I know a lot of people, we were doing the podcast the other night and Mike Smith came up and Andrew was emphatically no, this is the stupidest thing you could ever, it's the dumbest thing you do. Mike Smith is not built to play 60 games anymore. But Mike Smith does really well still when he plays 30 to 35 and stays healthy. Now, we have a interesting situation with our goaltending because we have still very much unknown Mikko Koskinen signed up for the next 3 years. And we have no idea what we're going to get. We've seen some very good games from him, and we've seen some atrocious games from him. So whoever they're going to bring in as the backup, it's going to have to be someone that can play. We can't be in the situation where it's a young goaltender that's unproven or making that first jump to the NHL because you don't want to have to rely on that. Now, if it works, that's great, but history has shown, again, that doesn't typically work that well to have that young goalie as your backup when you're not 100% sold on your starter. So a Mike Smith to come in to give him a hand, he's 37 years old. He played very well in the playoffs this year for Calgary. Mm-hmm. The reason Calgary got knocked out in the first round had nothing to do with Mike Smith, in my personal opinion. He still had a .917 save percentage. He was 3.2 goals a game, which isn't that great. But you look at the way Calgary played in that series, you cannot put that on Mike Smith. He played very well. The reason they didn't get beat any worse than I think they did is because of Mike Smith. So a player like that, because if he wants to reunite with the coach, that means he's coming in motivated. That means he's probably coming in good shape. That means he's willing to take that role. If you've got a veteran goalie that's willing to take the role of the backup or the 1A, the 1A, 1B scenario, maybe that's not a horrible idea. Because that's it doesn't matter who we bring in as a goaltender. That's I'm speculating here, but I think that would be what the Oilers would be looking for, is that 1B option, not pure backup where you're only going to play 20 games this year, but 1B that if our starter goes cold, you can come in and still win games, not just survive.
Yeah, and I think he has some experience with that type of role this past season in Calgary. He had to compete for the net with David Riddick is the way it became, and I totally agree. I think Mike Smith did all that he could for the Flames to keep that series somewhat, competitive for the Flames. He only won the one game, but it could have been much worse if it weren't for his goaltending. I see it. I see that as a good fit there, and if he really likes the situation with the coach, you would probably get him quite affordably too.
Yeah,
and that would be a key, is not to load a bunch of money onto a backup goalie. We already got too much money on our starter. Unless he pans out, we don't have the ability to go out and throw $3 million or $3.5 million at a backup, because that's what our starter's making. So there is a fine line there. You got to because you look at the other UFAs out there for goaltenders. We're talking to players like Bobrovsky. Well, that's not going to work. I think Bobrovsky's already bought a place in Florida, so I'm pretty sure that's where he's going to end up anyways. Piquerene, I believe, is a UFA. Cam Talbot's a UFA. These aren't fits anymore in Edmonton. So you're going to be into that second class of goaltender, but it's going to be a goaltender that's got a bit of a track record of having success in short stints, not someone that you need to rely on every game.
Is there anything else we want to talk about, or?
I was just going to finish up by asking, what are the realistic expectations for the Oilers next year as far as where they end up in the standings? Do you think it's going to be something like this year? Do you think the playoffs is quite within reach if the right if they make a few tweaks here and then we get that structure in place that you talk about with Dave Tippett, or do you see it maybe taking a couple years before they're back in the playoffs?
I think honestly, if we're a bubble team next year that's competed all year and slip into the playoffs or just miss the playoffs, I think that's kind of where we're at. I don't think we're and this, I'll always put the big caveat out there. It all depends on injuries. If we lose McDavid for half the season, this conversation needs to be erased. But if there's a structure there and there's a stability and a continuity where we have Sekera for the entire season, that kind of stuff, I think it's a bubble team. Will they make the playoffs for sure? I wouldn't be surprised either way. I know that's sitting on the fence a little bit, but I could see them missing the wild card by a couple points or making the wild card by a couple points. That's kind of where they're at. And it's a bit of a transition year, again, because we don't have the ability to make changes. So I don't think they're going to. It's those little fringe players they'll bring in, move some pieces around, shuffle it up a bit, and then see where they go. So if we miss the playoffs by 2 points or 3 points, I wouldn't be upset. If we miss the playoffs by 20 points, I'll be irate. Or if we slip in, great. And it's that window, I think, is that slightly better than this year, but if that's enough to push us in the playoffs, I don't know.
Well, Jack, we really appreciate you coming on. It sounds like you've got some interesting things going on in the offseason. You interviewed Reed Wilkins, I see. What else do you got going on? What's kind of the plan for the summer and going into next year?
We usually get a little silly in the off season for us. We try to put a cast together every couple of weeks at least, just to keep things rolling. We'd like to try to find some guests that have a little bit more than just hockey views, so we can expand what we're talking about, a little bit of stuff that's going on in Calgary, maybe touch a bit on the CFL as well, because some of us are pretty big fans of that. And we just kind of work our way through. We're kind of structuring ourselves a little bit different for next year to have a little bit more content and try to diversify the people that we're talking to for our interviews. So that's kind of what we'll be working on this summer.
I see you have a Patreon account.
Yes, that's just something we're playing around with. We're trying to basically bring in just a little bit of money to help, offset the cost of doing the pod. And, we all have the same thing. And we just thought it was a different way we could create some content with some different people that we interview to entice people to become a little more involved with the community. So it's just something we're going to try and play with and see if we have some success with it. Cool.
And are you guys going to be at the Pig and Duke in Calgary every pod, or?
We try to. It's not every pod, but it's probably that about 90%. Every now and then something like the Holland hire happenings and we can't do it, so we call in and we'll do it over the phone, no different than we're doing now. Most of probably 90% of our stuff will be done on the downtown here in Calgary, and it keeps us relaxed and lets us just kind of have a conversation instead of worrying about what's going on around us.
Cool. And where can people find you if they don't know?
You can find us on the social medias at Oilers YYC. You can find us on Instagram as well as Twitter. And any of the podcasting entities, be it through Apple, Android, Spotify, we're on all of them.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. This is great. Anytime, we're more than happy to come on.
All right, great. Thanks. So thanks again for Jack and Oilers YYC Podcast for taking some time. An interesting conversation. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in Oilerland. It sounds to me like they're very cautiously optimistic.
Well, I think you'd have to be, given how the last few years have gone. I mean, it's just when it looked like they're making progress, and then poof, the last couple of years happened. So, I think that's appropriate to be cautious, but, changed both the manager and the coach in the offseason, so fresh start for all involved there.
Yeah. Sean, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they have every right to be a little more cautiously optimistic, or even, as Dave was saying, just a little numb to things and just waiting for actual results. unfortunately, as Jack sort of alluded to, there's not much room for anything other than something maybe going some major moves, but I don't think that's what we'll see from Ken Holland, and it'll be interesting to see if Dave Tippett can get the most out of that roster that he can.
Cool. All right. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to put, because our interview with Jack is an hour, and we've decided we're going to separate this Jack interview and the Cam Robinson interview, so you don't sit there and have to listen for 2 hours, which is a long time. And if you want to listen for 2 hours, that's great. But we're going to separate the two podcasts this week. So you'll have the Oilers YYC podcast with Jack, and then we'll have the separate one that Sean and I had a chance to do with Cam Robinson. So thanks for everyone for listening to both. And Sean, where can we follow you?
I am BeardyCanuck03 on Twitter.
And Tyler?
And I'm on Twitter at TNoble, TNOBLE.
And I'm at KEVOLE. We will talk to you all next week. Thanks very much for listening. Bye for now.